that how kids dance? Yeah, I think so.
This video is brought to you by KEH Camera, the world's largest used camera store with over 60,000 items in stock.
Welcome folks, this video is for the heavy hitters, those of you who are using long lenses or those who just want to check them out. But I have to give a little forewarning that some of the numbers we're talking here will seem ridiculous to average shooters, both in terms of focal lengths and prices. This is niche equipment, but really fun to shoot with. So the main thing we're looking at today is the new 400mm f2.8 with a built-in 1.4 teleconverter for the Z mount. I'll be testing it on the Nikon Z9 and I've got a bunch of great tests lined up for this guy. And for a lot of it, I'm going to put it side by side with the latest generation F-mount version. That's the FLED on the Nikon D6. I'll be testing this lens on the D6, but also on the Z9 via the FTC Mark II adapter. Now, first things first, the question I got more than anything when I announced I was testing this lens was people wanting to know with the TC if it would effectively mean that they didn't need a 400 and a 600 or a 400 and 800 or maybe even all three of them if they're coming from F-mount glass to Z-mount. Watch the whole video, but I think you're going to be really happy. This is an incredibly versatile lens that works beautifully with teleconverters. I'm not a big fan of teleconverters. They always degrade your image, but this lens is so good that it still stands up with most of the different combinations. I'll go through all the spec details of these towards the end so we can jump into shooting. If you're not already, please do head on over and check me out on Facebook /Matt Granger, Instagram _Matt Granger, and my Art Nude Portraiture account is @ArtNudePortraiture. You can also check out my brand new Find the Shot course that features so many familiar faces, and it's just going live now over at learn.mattgranger.com. First things first, let's head out to one of my favorite places in Hong Kong, Cheung Chau Island, and shoot some of the big birds of prey with these guys side by side. So I've got the 400-2.8 here along with the old FLED version. I threw up on Facebook and Instagram asking what tests you guys would like to see on this one. And by far the #1 request was to see how the image quality is with no TC engaged, with the internal TC engaged, and then how it is with the 1.4 and 2x Z TC added to it. So I'm going to do all of that, and I'm also going to do the same shot using the FTC adapter, the old lens, and its 1.4 and 2x teleconverter as well. So it's going to end up a whole load of different files. I'll give you download link in the caption below, and that's where you can also follow along on Instagram. So let us begin. Shooting birds, I just can't get one to sit still for 15 minutes. Shooting a street sign or something, that doesn't really show you fine detail and micro contrast. So hair, face, skin, that should do it for us. If you guys haven't seen it, I did a full gimbal comparison looking at like, I don't know, maybe 10 different ones. This Pro Media Gear one is by far my favorite, and this one's in kind of safari green color. So the 400Z lens plus the 2x Z teleconverter, we're at 800 f. That shouldn't be f8. Ah, yes, 800 5.6, and it becomes 1120 5.6 if I engage the internal TC. Jumping on and shooting with the D6 and their 400 FLED, it's instantly recognizable why this was a classic. It performs beautifully, but I tell you what, after shooting with mirrorless for a while, that loud shutter in the DSLR is really jarring. Switching over and then having the option to be either completely silent or have an artificial shutter that just you can hear but won't disturb the wildlife is really, really nice. This was my first hands-on. I just wanted to get acquainted with the equipment. The positioning of the TC engaging switch is really great. You don't have to look away from the viewfinder or move your hand. You can just reach out and adjust it. There's a little thunk as it does fall into place, but in terms of the actual focus of this lens, I never once heard it focus at all. Perfect for video, or if you're shooting in blinds and you don't want a squeaky AF motor pulling those big lenses about. I'm really blown away by this. I generally don't add TCs to any lenses. It's up to you and your personal preference. I know some people are fine with it, but generally I find the image degradation is too much to justify the extra reach. But I'm gonna run through and give you my ranking on how this lens performs and versus the old version. And having looked through my archives, having shot on Safari with the 600 f4 and done some test shots with the 800 5.6, where I see the different combinations falling together. And this is going to maybe come off as sounding like an ad for this lens. I promise you it's not, but it's really, really good. So the 400mm lens with no teleconverters engaged, I'm gonna throw the image on screen here. I'm giving that a 10 out of 10. Now, of course, maybe it should be a 9.9 because there's room for improvement. But in terms of basically any Nikon lens that I've ever shot with, including my 200 f2, I think the image quality on this is better. We're just talking image quality here, but I would almost give it a 10 out of 10 for handling and autofocus as well. Engaging the internal TC, I have to say, in the field, I wasn't sure that the image quality was up there, but looking at them on my calibrated 4K monitors at home, and you can of course download those sample files over at my website to check them out for yourself, I'm gonna give that still a 9.25, which, yes, there is a noticeable image quality drop there, but I think if you put it side by side with so many other prime lenses, it still is performing better even with that TC. Now, with the internal TC off, but using the 1.4 ZTC, fantastic, maybe just a hair behind the internal. I'm giving that a 9 out of 10. Using the 1.4 plus the internal, I'm giving 8.5. It did drop back there, but just so you know, I still think anything over 8 is spectacular and I would be happy with it. So adding the 2 gets you, whatever it was, 700 and something millimeters, almost at the 800 mark. So still phenomenal. Turning the internal TC off again and bringing in the 2 times TC. Believe it or not, I'm actually giving this a 9.5. I think it performs better than the 1.4, and I think it performs better than the internal one. I was blown away with the quality getting off this, which then makes it an 800mm f5.6, which is precisely the specification of the most expensive lens in the Nikon range for f-mount, which comes in at $16,300. And I think this with the teleconverter is better. Now, using the 2 times teleconverter and the internal TC, however, I'd say it drops back to 7.5, noticeably the poorest performance of all of them. But you also have to keep in mind that we're then hitting a much higher ISO overall. So that factors into what you have to actually judge in the file. But having shot several different variations, I'm comfortable with those rankings. Now, the 400mm f-mount, I would give a 9 out of 10. So phenomenal, but I did give this 10. With the 1.7 teleconverter, only a 7. Really, this isn't a great teleconverter in my opinion. And the 2 times, again, I think it's slightly better than the 1.7. I'd give a 7.25. But essentially I'm saying this in any combination with 2 times, 1.4 times internal on or off, it's performing better than this one is with just one of the TCs. And in fact, I would say this with the TCs in many cases is still optically better than this one naked. That's how good this one is. Now, throwing the 600 and 800 in the mix, and note this isn't a side-by-side comparison, but it's based on my having shot with them before. I would say the 600 f4 is another 9 out of 10, and the 800 is probably a 9.25. Slightly ahead, but that's when you can actually nail the focus. I found it quite a bit of a tricky lens to actually get a high hit rate with. So that kind of shows you, look at all of the numbers there. I genuinely do think that this lens can, with the TC combos, replace the 600 f4 and the 800 5.6 and give you the option to go to 1120 and still get quite good results, but just not quite at the level I would want. Long story short, I want to buy this lens for when I'm back on the road more often. Before that, I'm gonna head into the aviary here in Hong Kong, get some more test shots for you guys. Then I'll come back in the studio, run you through the specs, and talk you through some of the downsides of this guy versus the old F mount. Man, oh man, being a reviewer can be an expensive job. The more I shoot with this lens, the more I want it. It's truly phenomenal. Now, for a lot of shooting situations, I think it's going to be hand-holdable, but that of course comes down to you, your capabilities, how long you're shooting, where you're shooting. If I had the option to use a monopod, I probably would, but at the aviary, shooting for like an hour and a half, just doing it handheld was completely fine. On the weekend when I was shooting with the birds, this combo is noticeably heavier. For an extended period of time, I definitely want to be getting in my Pro Media Gear tripod and gimbal. For this one, I probably still would. It makes everything just that much smoother. You can get a slower shutter speed, so potentially dropping your ISO back. But it's just epic. I have to say, in terms of the autofocus, the old kit is doing phenomenally well. If you're an F-mount shooter and you're still tossing up if you want to go to Z-mount though, I have to say this lens on the FTC adapter performs even better on the Z9 than it did on the flagship D6 DSLR. So even if you don't want to upgrade your lenses, upgrading the body is a good option. As I mentioned at the start, this video is brought to you by KEH Camera. They've been partners of mine for years. I bought and sold countless different items with them. They have the world's biggest range of used equipment. And if you're looking to sell any of your equipment, maybe to fund a new lens or something, you can book a one-on-one session with them on video camera, show them your equipment, get a quote instantly. If you're happy with it, they'll send you a packaged label for the bigger items. You can ship it off to them and then they'll do an inspection. Money gets sent to your account. If any issues come up and you're not happy with the final offer that you're given, then no harm, no foul, you don't have to accept it. In the description below, there's a code that you can get 5% extra when you're selling to them, or 5% off if you choose to buy anything from their huge range. Everything they sell has been cleaned, tested, checked, and comes with a warranty. So check them out at the link below, and thanks to KEH for sponsoring this video. Now, there are some downsides to this lens compared to the old version. So first off, let's just run through the specs. So the F-mount lens is 3.8 kilos or 8.4 pounds. It takes a 40.5mm drop-in filter at the rear of the lens. It has 16 elements in 12 groups and a closest focusing distance of 2.6 meters, giving you a maximum magnification of 0.16. Whereas the new guy is significantly lighter at 2.95 kilograms or 6.5 pounds. It takes a larger 46mm drop-in filter. It has a much more complex design, 25 elements in 19 groups. It'll focus closer to 2.5 meters, giving you a reproduction ratio of 0.23. Enabling the internal TC takes you up to 560mm at f4 and increases your minimum aperture from f22 to f32. Now, I have to say that weight savings is really noticeable in the field and welcomed. However, there are a couple of things. First of all, the handle is now smaller, which may be justifiable being that it's lighter, but for my hand, I barely fit in there. So if you actually carry your lens like this when you're going from shoot to shoot, the other one has a much better handle for that. And because the lens is now longer, there's more behind the foot. On a sturdy tripod like my gimbal head, there's no problem. But if I didn't have this tripod mount on the back of my camera, it won't just balance the body on the lens. The center of gravity isn't right above the foot when you have a body attached. Whereas with the old one, you can see I just have it sitting here because the center of gravity is right here. The center of gravity on this one, if you took this out, it's actually behind because there's more elements here. So it's not really an issue because how often do you need to sit it like this where you don't have a sturdy enough tripod? And for hand holding, it's really great having more of the weight at the back of the lens. It makes it a lot easier to shoot with. There are, however, a couple of other things that I think have been downgraded on this one. First of all, there's now no VR switch on the lens. You have to go into the camera manual to enable or disable or change the modes, whereas of course all the previous ones would have on, off and sport mode for your VR as a minimum. The case has also been downgraded. It used to be a super secure hard case. Now again, this really depends on you and how you like to shoot. If you ever checked in your equipment or had it stacked, then the hard case is great. But if you were someone who always carries your gear on the plane or to the shoot, then actually the soft padded backpack sling style that the new one comes with is actually really welcome, and I found it really comfortable to carry around. You can definitely fit in some teleconverters and stuff in the bag, but it doesn't have room for you to then add the camera body in there as well. And last but not least, this isn't a big deal for me, but if you want your lens hood to match the specification of the trim of your Mercedes, McLaren or Ferrari, the old lens had kind of a carbon fiber pattern on the outside, and the new one is much more standard, just plastic. So that's something, whether it bothers you or not. Now, prices. As I record this, the F mount is $11,200, the Z mount is $14,000. Big money. The 600mm for F is $12,300 and the 800mm for F is $16,300. So if you're that rare photographer who actually owns the 4, 6 and 800, or basically any two of them for F mount, and you're tossing up, will this cover it for you? If 560 at f4 is good enough to replace 600 at f4 for you, then the answer is yes, because the 2x teleconverter makes it an 800 5.6. Now, if you're one of those F-mount shooters who's been holding out for long lens options in Z, who wanted to know if this will do the duty of 2 or 3 different lenses, and maybe you own 2 or 3 of the 400, 600, 800 primes in F-mount, let me put this to you. If you sold your flagship DSLR and those 2 or 3 lenses, and then went and bought the 400 2.8 and the 2 teleconverters, which are $550 and $600 respectively, you can probably get all of that and a Z9 and come out kind of as a wash. I haven't done the exact maths, but somewhere in the ballpark, because like I said, this will replace all 3 of them in one lens. Now, of course, I realize for sports photographers, you might need a 400 and a 600 side by side on 2 different bodies, so that's not going to do it for you. But rest assured, these lenses are still performing fantastically well via the FTC adapter on the Z9s anyway. So if you were just looking for a pathway to start your move to mirrorless, I think this lens is a hell of a gateway drug, and I'm seriously considering putting in a request for myself for birds. The portraits were nice too, but mainly for birds and when I go on safari. So let me know your thoughts, folks. Try to talk some sense to me so that I'm not putting a small car's worth of money into a lens. And do check out all of the links below. The Find the Shot Your course is live below, my social media as well, Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter, as well as KEH with my codes to get 5% on the buy or sell side. Thanks, folks. I'll see you soon.